Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Dave Burch. I'm one of the field supervisors, program managers for residential construction here in Montgomery County. We primarily manage the inspection team. We have a team of 16, soon to be 17, if we can find a suitable applicant. And right now, we are in the process of trying to push these codes uphill, if you will. As most of you know, it's quite the process. Right now, what we're going to do today basically is we're going to discuss the 2021 code changes as I think they'll most affect the remodeling organization. We are, and then we'll also discuss some of the changes that the Montgomery County team here has put forth for consideration by the county council. None of it's earth shattering. And there's appears to be a lot less effect on the remodeling industry than the new construction industry with regards to electrification and those types of things. Please, as we're going through this, don't hesitate to, raise your hand or yell at me and say, hey, what about this? Or, what we're, because I need to know what your concerns are as well. So I am going to share a screen here. If I can remember how to do this. We're so team centric, I forget how to use Zoom.
On my screen, it's at the bottom. I don't know about yours, but it's green.
So let's see what
there you go.
Looks like. Okay.
All right.
All right. Can you see the whole slide? Okay, there we go.
Yes.
All right. So again, significant changes to the 2021 IRC. I am going to touch on just a piece of the NEC with regards to kitchens. That seems to be something that everybody's really, kind of trying to figure out. And I understand that each jurisdiction is kind of handling it a little bit different, but and then we're going to talk about, I'll also talk about the requirement. Probably doesn't have a great deal of impact on remodeling unless you're putting in new electric panels or meter sockets, that type of thing. But we will talk about the kitchens. So here's my contact information, and I'll make these slides available to anybody that wants them. Feel free to use my phone number if questions come up. When you're doing designs, when you're doing, if you have questions about the inspection process here in Montgomery County, what we require and that kind of thing, by all means, give me a call. And if I don't have the answer for you, I can get you to the right person who does. So starting out, and this will have very little impact on the remodeling organization, I believe, but I wanted to point out that we're starting to see more and more people adding additions to homes, and they're like, well, what about these shipping containers? And so we are starting to see them. It's we actually have a house under construction. It's almost final that is all shipping containers. You wouldn't know it though to look at it. They use the shipping container as structure mainly, but there are the code now addresses the intermodal shipping container and how to handle them in the code, which essentially it becomes an engineered product and goes over to the IBC. As we go through this, you're going to see that some things are highlighted with yellow, and then I've got some words in red. Those words in red are incidental changes that we've made via executive regulation, and I'll explain that. So under the story height, 301.3, they now have an exception in there. If it doesn't exceed a 12-foot wall stud clear height, it's allowed to go up to 13.7. Sometimes we'll see this in sunrooms and additions. And some of these slides, by the way, if we need to skip through them, let me know. If they don't pertain to you and no interest, we'll move on. The only change with regards to dwelling garage openings, or what some people refer to as the man door, in the old code, they had to be self-closing. They did not have to latch. Now they have to latch. The challenge we have with this, anecdotally, is the houses are so tight now that the door doesn't want to close unless the garage door is open. So, or doesn't want to latch. So something to be aware of. But now they have to catch and latch. Okay, this next section, 310.1, this goes into the emergency escape and rescue openings. And I think that this was probably going to be a topic of discussion, because in this chapter, or in this section, there have been some changes that will frankly make it easier to meet that emergency rescue opening size requirement. So this part isn't new. Basements, habitable attics, every sleeping room shall have not less than one operable emergency escape rescue opening. If it has a sprinkler system, then the sprinkler system can be, you no longer have to have the opening in the room. It can be anywhere in the basement that's covered by the sprinklers. So what you're seeing here is the code as it's written right now. And what's changed here is the emergency rescue opening shall open directly to a public way. In some cases, that's a problem. So they added that it can now open to the yard is not required to open directly into a public way, where the yard opens to an unobstructed path from the yard to the public way. And I know that's a lot of words, but basically, if you can get out of the basement to a 36-inch wide pathway that will lead you to the public way, that now satisfies the requirement. We get a
We're
lot.
getting away with that in the past, because I don't remember that really ever being a problem, and we put plenty of new rescue openings in backyards.
Well, I think that's one of those things where they cleaned up the code. I think it
Yeah.
was where, because I know that my inspectors, we did, if it opened into the backyard or something other than another building, we allowed it. I think this was strictly cleaning up the code to say, okay, we don't care how you get to the public way as long as it can get there.
Yeah.
So it raises some questions, things like, okay, if it opens to a backyard that doesn't have a gate, well, then a gate has to be put in because you can't reach the public way from the backyard. And in our discussions, I think the consensus was this is to keep people from feeling trapped in the backyard and feeling that they need to re-enter the house in order to get out to the front yard and out to where the firemen are. So 310.7, alterations, repairs of existing basements. New sleeping rooms created in an existing basement have to have an escape and rescue opening. Other than the new sleeping rooms, where basements are being built out or undergoing alterations or repairs, an escape and rescue opening is not required if there is no sleeping room, if it's an existing basement. So they clean that up a little bit. The exception would be an operable window complying with the window sizes, and we'll talk about that in a second, shall be acceptable as an opening. And they have changed that window section. The red annotation here is something that was inserted by Montgomery County. The code for Montgomery County reads, where a change of use and occupancy would require an emergency escape and rescue opening in accordance with section 310.1, operable windows serving as rescue openings shall comply with the following. And the reason we put in the use and occupancy is we run into a lot of situations where we have basements that were originally designed as storage areas, and or in some areas literally as cellars. They've got, very short ceiling heights and that kind of thing, and now somebody wants to stick a basement down there, they want to build an accessory dwelling unit. That is a change of use. The occupancy of the home has not changed, but the use of that basement and the occupancy of that basement is changing because now you're adding a sleeping room. So here's where the code changed. An existing in the old code, if your egress window opened to grade, and we consider this to grade, you had to have a minimum net clear opening of 5 square feet. If it's above grade, it's 5.7 square feet. Under the new code, they have lowered that to a minimum of 4 square feet with a net clear opening height of 22 inches and a minimum clear opening width of 20 inches. And then that coupled with this piece, replacement windows comply with the requirement if the replacement window meets what's required in item 1, 4 square feet, and the replacement window is the manufacturer's largest standard side window that will fit in the existing frame or existing rough opening. And that's kind of where I think it's going to affect a lot of you and your clients, is that we think this is going to alleviate the requirement to, concrete saw basement walls and remove CMU and increase that opening beyond what windows are already there. The replacement window should be permitted to be the same operating style as the windows or style that provides for the window opening. So we're not requiring casement windows. We're not requiring, anything special. And when I say we, the code, we did not change this one.
Is the requirement still the same for the height off of the floor inside?
Yes, 44 inches.
Yeah.
Yes, that did not change. Yeah, that I've been told throughout my career that that's so that firemen don't fall into the room when they're climbing through that window. But I've also haven't seen a whole lot of firemen climbing through that window. They usually knock down the front door, and, you know,
Yeah.
but I guess it's possible. But
Well,
also
I think it's more about getting out than getting in.
yeah, that would make more sense to me.
Yeah.
You can most people can climb up 44 inches.
If you've got a fire behind your butt, you can climb up a little bit higher than that.
Yeah,
But
that
I
is
don't know.
true. Um, Stairways. There have been some changes in the stairways. So under 311.7, stairways must continue to comply with 311.7, but they've added some exceptions. Stairways not within or serving a building, porch, or deck, stairways leading to non-habitable attics, and stairways leading to crawl spaces. Okay, the walking surface, really all they did was they changed some from inches to units here to make it consistent. Same thing here, they changed it to units. But whoop, I missed the slide. Sorry. So under 311.7 basically talks about the different kinds of stairs, whether or not they're the riser height, the tread depth, the headroom, and so on and so forth. The exceptions, they're not listed here as far as what changed in them, but the exceptions here take away some of those requirements. So stairways leading to non-habitable attics, for instance, they don't. I mean, you can have a ladder going up there. It's not required that it be a stair, and it's not required that that stair geometry be met. If the attic becomes habitable, and we'll talk about that here in a second, then it must comply. Stairways that aren't within a building, not serving a porch, a deck, or other structure attached to that building. And there's where we get into landscape stairs, stairs going up into the yard that feeds into a swimming pool area, those types of things. They do not have to meet those geometry requirements. Yeah, the stair requirements. And then stairs leading to crawl spaces. I must say, other than maybe a one step down, I've never seen a set of stairs go into a crawl space, but I guess it happens. Okay, we talked about that. So the stairway walking surface, they added an exception. And this has to do with that lower landing that we always get tripped up on at decks and screened-in porches, additions off the back of the house, that kind of thing. Where the surface of a landing is required, which is most places, elsewhere in the code, to drain surface water, the walking surface of the landing shall be sloped not steeper than 1 unit vertical and 20 units horizontal, or a 5% slope in the direction of travel. So that allows you to have that slope without having to worry about the tread depth of that, or the landing being flat and level. Smoke alarm locations changed a little bit. Sorry, let me turn this bell off. Smoke alarm locations changed a little bit in that we had to address these big tray ceilings. Again, the code council. In a hallway and in a room open to the hallway in a dwelling unit where the ceiling height of a room opens into a hallway serving bedrooms, exceeds that of a hallway by 24 inches or more. And that's a whole word salad there. But essentially, as you can see in this picture here, you can imagine we're standing in a hallway that's feeding into this room. It doesn't do any good necessarily to put the smoke detector at the hallway level when the hot gases are going to collect against the ceiling. And by the time the hot gases collect, 24 inches deep into a coffered ceiling, the smoke detector, we've got a roar and fire going. So in a case where you have a deep coffered ceiling like this, or, like I tell our guys, think like smoke when you're looking at this. It's going to rise and it's going to flow along the ceiling until it reaches the highest point. There has to be a smoke detector up in that coffered ceiling. We saw this several years ago when we started getting into vaulted ceilings, and the smoke detector had to be at the top of the vaulted ceiling as well. This is kind of an interesting change. Smoke alarms listed and marked that it helps reduce cooking nuisance alarms shall not be installed less than 6 feet horizontally from a cooking appliance, from a permanently installed cooking appliance. And the only thing I could come up with there for the reasoning behind this is so that you still don't get those nuisance alarms. Because if you get it close enough to that cooking surface, you're going to get the alarm. So they're just saying that, these type of alarms, they're UL listed, and the installation instructions say that they must be 6 feet or further away from the cooking surface. This was just under the protection of wood and wood-based products. This was just a kind of a clarification. They added including columns that rest directly on concrete. Other than that, nothing has changed. I know you all probably don't do a great deal of solar, but under the current solar panel install type scenario, you have to have a pathway around the tops and the sides to allow firefighter egress and ingress off of the roof, on and off the roof, and able to vent the roof. What they've come up with, though, is now we have shingles that are actually part of the roof. And in this situation where it's a building integrated photovoltaic system, in other words, shingles, if they have been determined to not expose a firefighter to electrical shock hazard, then the pathways are not required, because a firefighter will go right through the solar shingles. And that's the same for the emergency egress pathways. Okay, let's talk about habitable attics. The remodeling industry here in Montgomery County seems to have increased the clients have increased their desire to turn their attic into bedrooms and playrooms and habitable spaces. And we always kind of struggled with it because it was a determination of whether or not, does this add a fourth floor to this townhouse or home, and that kind of thing. And then other codes come into play. So under 326, they changed the habitable attics and said basically gave it a minimum dimension, okay, which is under 304, it's 70 square feet. Ceiling height is a minimum of 7 feet. And 326.3 is where it really gets interesting, because this is where it breaks it down as to a story above grade. So a habitable attic shall be considered a story above grade plane, unless the following exceptions, and it's a little bit lengthy here, is met. So a habitable attic shall not be considered to be a story above grade plane, provided the habitable attic meets all of the following. The aggregate area of the habitable attic is either of the following. Okay, so can't be greater than a third of the floor area of the story below, unless it is sprinklered. Then it can't be any greater than a half. And this limits it into essentially being a one room, in a townhouse scenario, a one room habitable attic. It also has to have the occupiable space is enclosed by a roof, knee walls or full walls on the sides, and a floor ceiling assembly below. So if you have a flat roof and somebody decides to put a roof deck up there, we do not consider that a habitable attic. We consider that a fourth story, because it doesn't have a roof, and it's generally larger than half the size of the room below. The
Is
floor
that
of
a
the
zoning, is that a zoning determination, or are there structural changes that are affected?
it's mostly to zoning, because and I always go back to townhouses, but if a townhouse creates a fourth story, now it falls under the IBC and not the IRC. So, and then zoning takes over, zoning gets involved as far as whether or not that's allowed in those zones, and so on and so forth. If it's a single
So,
family home, then it's not a zoning issue.
yeah, to throw a fly in the ointment, suppose you have a already existing attic space and they want to remodel it and put a dormer in, for instance.
Okay, so here's where we've gone round and round with discussions on this, because these next two items, the floor of the habitable attic does not extend beyond the exterior walls of the story below. So no cantilevered floors and that kind of thing. But the next one is where it gets a little bit, let's see here.
I gotta go. See you guys later.
I'll
Take
let you
care,
know,
Doug.
Doug.
Dave, are we adopting the 2023 NEC along with the 2021 ECC? Okay, thank you.
We have skipped sorry you have to go, but we have skipped the 2020 and we're going directly to the 2023
What's your best guess about when this will all start to come into effect?
after the first of the year.
Perfect. Thank you.
The
Sorry about that.
codes are currently at the county council for their approval, but then we're going to have training time for us and the industry and so on. So,
Perfect. Thank you. See you guys later.
yeah.
All right.
So David, to answer your question, so if it's a under the old code, and I'll be honest, now that you brought that up, I'm gonna have to look and make sure that it didn't change. But under the old code, if you put a dormer out, now you've gone outside the walls of the existing structure. But they changed it And if I'm not mistaken, because we used to make people, if you want a dormer, if you want a window up there, it has to be a reverse dormer so that it
What do
didn't
you mean
go
by
out
a
to the
reverse?
ceiling.
What do you mean by a reverse dormer?
So instead of it sticking out from the seat from the rooftop, it was sunken back into the rooftop.
Oh, a window. I get it.
Yeah,
Okay.
like a window. Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
But I will check and see because I think they took that out. I think you're allowed to put dormers as long as the dormer does not exceed the wall below.
Mhm. And I'm thinking about a call that I was just on, and it would be the dormer would be in the third story. So
Right,
owning is 2.5 stories, right? So
right.
so this would apply in that it's happening in that attic area.
Yeah,
You
I'll get
always
some.
make us the bad guy.
Not me.
Well, it's good we need to understand this because we're the first person that they're talking to about this, and
Right.
I don't
Let
know
me.
what.
I'm going to make a note here. I think I have your contact information. But I'm going to make a note here to check on dormers, and then I'll get back to you on it.
Okay, thank you.
Um, if it becomes a habitable attic, then one of the one of the things that we struggle with here is, especially I see this a lot in Chevy Chase and Bethesda, where people have an attic. It's been, had a walk-up staircase. It's had it's been used for storage for years, and now they want to remodel it and turn it into a bedroom or a playroom or whatever and make it a habitable attic. Um, and then we run into the situation where, those crazy little winder steps that they put in to, shove the Christmas tree up there, they don't meet the provisions of Section 311 for stair, handheld widths, depths of tread, riser heights, the works. So this is a change is if it's a habitable attic, then the stairs must comply. Now,
Mhm.
what seems a little crazy to me is that even though they must comply, you're allowed ladder stairs, you're allowed ship's ladder type stairs. So it's kind of like, okay, well, on one hand, we're telling them they have to comply, but on the other hand, we're saying you can kind of do whatever you want.
Well, when does the existing part of the building code kick in? That, what is it, Appendix J?
Yeah, so now we have modified Appendix J to allow headroom differences and that kind of thing. And as long as you're not touching the stairs, as long as you're not refinish, well, you can refinish them, but as long as you're not, replacing them, then we believe that that falls under the existing building code. And as such, it's essentially grandfathered in. Where we run into problems is when people want to move the stairs. Well, if you move the stair, you're touching it, and now it has to comply.
Yeah. If I'm increasing the floor area on that floor up there, though, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but you're allowing the existing building code to cover that staircase, even though it's too narrow and too steep. And
Right,
I've added 200 square feet now to the floor.
right. I
So,
I hear you.
yeah.
I will. I'll make sure that the executive regs that right now they're technically in draft form, but they're at the county council for approval. It's already gone through the public discussion period and that kind of thing. But I'll make sure that a copy, an electronic copy, gets sent to the organization, and we can make sure,
We've looked at it and we've reviewed it. I don't think anyone had any comments to it.
Okay.
I don't know if you're aware of it. We have a quarterly call scheduled, and it's mostly with George Musty and that end of the team. But they've brought in people from zoning, and land development was on our last call, and we have a regularly scheduled call. It has better attendance than this. I think we got shoved around a little bit today.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, this is a change, but for whatever reason, so under concrete slabs, it was 6 mil poly required. The 2021 code now says 10 mil, but the 2024 code puts it back to 6 mil. So here at the county, we said, we're not changing it. So we're leaving it at 6 mil. And that was actually brought up as a comment from industry saying, this is going back to 6 mil. Why are we playing this game? And it made sense for us to leave it alone. So
Yeah.
we're leaving it alone. So this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about. How are we doing on time?
They're recording this, so as long as you're happy going
Okay.
through it, I think this is a useful presentation, and we'll let people know that the recording is out there.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
I would encourage you to go through it, and I'm a great
Okay.
audience.
So so we get a lot of questions about, well, I should say we get a lot of surprise phone calls because an inspector has gone out on a job site and found that somebody demoed something beyond what is required for sprinklers. And now sprinklers are required in the house. And this may or may not affect you all a lot.
Does all the time.
Before I get into this, though, I do want to mention that if you're putting an addition on a house and the house is sprinklered, then that addition must also be sprinklered. So, but this, we try to get this information out to everybody because this has changed. We added this to the executive regulation. A sprinkler system must be installed when 50% or more of the gross floor area of the existing building, excluding basements, we no longer count basements as part of that gross floor area, is demolished, or if 50% or more of the existing exterior walls above foundation walls, calculated in linear feet by each story, is demolished. So essentially, if you tear down more than 50% of the wall of the first floor walls, then you have to put sprinklers in the house. And this comes up quite frequently in cases where the sprinkler or the remodeler or the contractor has, they want to bump out the rear side of the building. They start tearing into it and find that the sidewall is also, got termites in it. Or we had one the other day where the excavator swung its boom and knocked down 2 walls. Once you hit that 50%, then sprinklers are required.
Suppose you don't demolish any of the building, but you increase it by more than 50%.
That does not matter. We don't count, and the reasoning behind it, well, yeah. So let me back up to answer your question. You could add 6,000 square feet to a 1,000 square foot house, and if you didn't demolish 50% of those walls, you're good. You don't have to put sprinklers in it. As of right now, there
Mhm.
has been discussions that to put a limit on it, like you said, if you double the size of the house or exceed a certain percentage of the house, then now you've got to bring it all up to sprinkler.
Mhm.
Um, but frankly, we look at it like in some of these homes, some of these houses are fed by 3/4 inch water lines.
Yeah.
And to put a sprinkler in one of these houses is expensive and truly problematic. So they kind of looked at it and said, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We're going to allow them to add to the house as long as they don't tear down the
Mhm.
walls. And I want to point out the existing or the definition of a wall is defined as unaltered bottom plate, top plate, studs, and sheathing. And the theory there is if you open up the sheathing, then you have the ability to put to run sprinkler lines or it's considered a demolished wall.
Yeah.
And this can become problematic on some of these old homes that have like T-ply sheathing that's all falling apart or skip sheathing, that kind of thing. Uh,
Mhm. You've done a very good job explaining that. I don't think I ever fully understood it, but I got it now.
okay. Exterior decks, everything pretty much stayed the same. We are seeing some changes in a couple of the tables as far as heights of posts, spans of beams, and spans of floor joists. Um, Frankly, I think that has more to do with the fast growth lumber that we're receiving with, you know, I can tell you what they call number two certainly doesn't look like the number two I used to see, 10 years ago.
I
Um,
I would challenge you on that. I've seen some really nice lumber lately. It's like they've gotten into the sustainable part of the growth, but the
really?
pressure treated decking we've been using lately is really nice looking.
I bought for my basement, I bought some wood the other day and a pallet of 2x4s. And I think it came from Austria. Um, but I opened them up and I was like, these are too pretty to turn into a wall. There was, I mean, the biggest knot hole in them was, no bigger than around in your little finger.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
How
so
tall is too tall for a post?
what's that?
How tall is too tall for a post? Which code section is that?
Believe it's 507. It's the table. Hold on one second. I can tell you.
Sorry to distract you, but I'm working on a design now and it's got 10'6".
Are you using 6x6s?
Yeah.
You can go to 14 feet with a 6x6.
Okay. That'll give me a headache going that high. Okay.
Yeah. 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 14 feet on a 6x6. And I think it's, well, of course it depends, but 6x6,
I'll look it up. Don't.
Southern pine is 14 feet. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The one change in this area was decks shall be designed for the live load or the ground snow load, whichever is greater. And in this area, that has little or no effect. But you might get out towards Deep Creek and some of the heavier snow areas and find that it does. change some design criteria.
Mhm.
The footings have changed a little bit. Footings are not required for freestanding decks that consists of joists directly supported on grade over their entire length. In other words, if it's a wooden platform built on the ground, we don't need footings.
Mm.
In fact, you don't need a permit. Footings are not required for joists bearing directly on precast concrete pier blocks at grade, as long as there's no support beam. So as this person is putting the joists on and that load is carried by the joist and not the beam, you're allowed to use the concrete blocks. And the deck can't exceed 200 square feet, and the walking surface can't be more than 20 inches above grade at any point within 36 inches measured horizontally from the edge. So it can't be on a hillside. Here's actually the table you're looking for, 507.4. So another change, where guards are supported on deck framing, guard load shall be transferred to the deck framing with continuous load path to the deck joists. And this comes into, we're seeing more and more surface mounted deck systems from various manufacturers. And rather, they can't be just free floating on deck material. There has to be structure underneath.
So as long as are you talking about pre-manufactured, and I, use a name Trex, Luminex, and it just has a flange that you screw down.
Right,
If you screw that down, it has to go into something other than the deck board.
right. It has to go into the structure. It can't,
Yeah.
it has to be transferred at least to a floor joist or blocking that's connected to the floor joist. It can't just be, frankly, we see a lot of homeowners, they'll just screw it to the top of the Trex and there's nothing there but Trex holding it. There's the
Yeah.
screws embed into nothing.
Yeah.
Where guards are connected to the interior or exterior side of a deck joist or beam, the joist or beam shall be connected to the adjacent joist to prevent rotation of the joist or beam. This is to address the the impact against the guardrail, pulling the band board off of the deck, because frankly it's usually just nailed in to the joist, and this keeps that from rotating. And then, as mentioned here, connections relying only on fasteners and end grain withdrawal shall not be permitted. So it has to be in to a lateral withdrawal.
Will you be revising the deck guide for
Yes,
the comments?
it's actually been revised. We just haven't released it until the county council approves and it's signed.
Well, that's going to be an important message to get out, that there's a new version of it.
Right.
Because, I mean, those of us that prepare plans, we rely on that.
Yeah, we're trying to establish some better coordination and communication with the industry. Trying to establish some spreadsheets, databases, or whatever, so that we can blast, transmit, hey, here's your new deck leakage, duct leakage form, or here's your new deck package, or here's your new, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
trying to
Well,
get
I
better.
think most of us get the newsletter, and it's, by choice to either read it or not. But
Right. Right.
um, I read it.
So where guards supported on top of deck framing, this is what I was talking about. Where deck guards are mounted on top of the decking, the guards must be connected to the deck framing or blocking, installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And this just is basically codifying what we have not allowed here in Montgomery County for some time is you cannot notch support posts. That essentially turns that 4x4 into a 2x4 at the point of stress. And more often than not, when they're notched, we see that they're overcut. So it's usually even less than a 2x4. Plastic composite guards shall comply with the provisions of 507. Essentially, 507.2 refers to the how they're mounted, or that you have to have a ES report that stipulates how they're to be connected. Other guards shall be in accordance with either manufacturer's instructions or accepted engineering principles, signed and stamped. Garage door labeling, I don't know why, this is pretty simple, but I guess this is a new label that's required. Frankly, my inspectors aren't going to be looking for this for 6 months because the industry does not have this label on the garage doors until this code hits. So, and then before we get into chapter 45, I want to talk about the kitchen islands and receptacle requirements. And we can have a greater discussion when we get into the National Electrical Code changes here in the future. We're still going through it and making changes based on Montgomery County. But one of the things that seems to have a lot of people raising questions up until this code cycle, you've had the requirement to have an outlet on an island or on the end of a peninsula. And most of the time, these are placed not under the overhang, but on the end where there is no overhang. Under the new National Electrical Code, those outlets are not allowed. Well, let me back up. So that is in the NEC, that is a required outlet under the 2020 code, or I'm sorry, under the 2017 code. That is a required outlet to be on that island. Under the 2023 code, that outlet is no longer a required outlet anywhere on the island. However, you can still put one on there, but if you put one on there, it cannot be on the end of the island. So what they've said is kids and adults, as they walk past the island, their arms and whatnot, and kids are pulling them off, but they're pulling the appliances off on top of themselves anyway. So they've said we're going to eliminate that outlet completely. Now, if you want an outlet on an island, it either has to be a pop-up out of the surface of the island or peninsula, or it has to be mounted on the face of the step up to a breakfast nook type of overhang. And it gets in the code actually gets into what's waterproof and what's water resistant and all of that. I'm not going to go into that today, but I just want to make everybody aware that this is a big change that's not only going to impact your customers, because your customers are going to want this, but it's also going to impact cost, because frankly, it's much cheaper to put an outlet on the end of the island than it is to do a pop-up or do a bump up on a breakfast table or breakfast overhang.
So are you saying that we will no longer have to put an outlet on an island at all if we don't want it? Yeah.
Now,
I think
personally,
you'd be surprised at how many homeowners want that.
right. Well, personally, I think so. Here's the other part of the code that makes no sense. If you don't put an outlet on the island, you must install in the base of the cabinet the capability for them to run wire and install an outlet at a later date. So that means you're either running conduit or you're running a wire and wire nutting it into a junction box in the bottom.
Mhm. Well, you might have a sink and a dishwasher on there already, so.
Right, right.
Um,
So it's right now it's all being worked through. Personally, I think this is going to change again because we're getting to the point where if if you provide the ability to put it in later, as soon as the final inspection is done, the homeowner is going to put it in the end of the island where they want it anyway. We're not sure how we're going to approach that, but more to follow on that subject. We'll certainly get the word out once we figure it out.
yeah, there certainly are enough outlets in the end of islands that are already in
Exactly.
place. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what prompted this other than what I've heard is, well, there's been a higher incidence of people hooking the appliance and pulling it off.
Yeah. Well, here again, this is getting the right message out to the designers so that they know to properly design a place for an outlet. See, I would have put a pedestal on the front of it, and what I'm hearing is, well, that's wrong too, because the water just flow right into that. So
And
you
then
can
we
think about
have
it and design it and still be wrong.
right. And then we have chapter 45. So chapter 45 is not in the IRC. Chapter 45 is a chapter that has been added by Montgomery County. We've had this for years, and there's very little changes in it. But basically, this is the protection chapter for site work and safeguards. Um, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on it, but 4501 is storage and placement of construction material. It's supposed to be stored greater than 5 feet off the walking path, public right of way. It's supposed to be protected, um, uh, out of harm's way. Um, I'm going to kind of read some of these just to make sure I'm not misleading, but whoops, whoa, what's going on? So construction equipment material must be stored in place so as not to endanger the public, the workers, or adjoining property for the duration of the construction project. Disposal of construction debris and material. Basically, that's keep it on your lot. Don't let it blow around the neighborhood. Keep it in the dumpsters. Keep the dumpsters emptied. This is all stuff that's pretty much common sense, and everybody pretty much adheres to it. But every once in a while, we get complaints, and we're out there writing citations. And we don't like doing that. Utility connections. That's just a notice that utilities must be disconnected if you're doing a complete remodel where nobody's living in the house. We are real lenient on that because we know you still need power, you still need some of the utilities, but Mainly it's natural gas and propane. We want to make sure that that's off and capped while the work's going on.
Suppose you need it
Excavate,
for heat.
I'm sorry.
Suppose you need it for heat.
Again, that can be addressed if it's protected. Yeah, I mean, the only
Where is
time we really
this?
worry about utility disconnections is when they're going to do a demo rebuild, where they're tearing a house down and rebuilding
Yeah. Where is this in the current DPS world?
it. You
I
mean,
just
where is
searched
it
on the
located?
website. Yeah, this chapter.
It's under the residential code section, and I believe it's listed as, I think the current one is listed as ER, I want to say 1931. The
Hmm.
excavation part of this, we have added this because if an excavation exceeds a depth of 5 feet, shoring must be provided in accordance with the best practices, or there must be a 1-to-1 slope out of the hole. We've had instances, not on well, sometimes on remodels when they're adding a section to the basement and they've excavated out for the basement, and it's 8 to 10 feet deep. And we see workers down in there, and they've got a concrete wall on one side of them and a dirt wall on the other. Um, the This is actually something right out of Moshe.
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't Moshe or OSHA govern this stuff anyway?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Fill supporting foundations. Sometimes you'll get into a situation where it has to be underpinned. That has to be, have special inspections for the compacted fill, and it has to comply with the IBC as adopted by the county. 4056 is the one that we get the most attention on. This is the protection of pedestrians and protection of adjoining property, 4057. So in an instance where the remodeling or the construction is within 5 feet of the pedestrian walkway, or if there's an excavation that's located within 5 feet of the street lot line, then safety barriers must be installed. And that safety barrier can be the orange fence with the steel posts driven in, but there has to be something that warns people that it's a hazardous area. And to a certain degree, hopefully it keeps the kids out. But I know when I was a kid, it didn't keep me out. So the and that just has to be 42 inches high, or and of a color that is a warning. Now, in some instances, we have required a 6 foot chain link fence when a property, usually it's when a property has been abandoned. But it all falls under this chapter of the executive regulation. And then under 4507, protection of adjoining property, this is one of our biggest complaint areas. Adjoining public and private property has to be protected from damage during excavation, construction, remodeling, and demolition work. The protection must be provided for footings, foundation, party walls, chimneys, skylights, roofs, and that kind of thing. Where this has really become, this is more in a situation where you're doing a big bump out and your over dig is very, very close to a property line, like a Chevy Chase or Bethesda area, where the the house is literally 5 feet from the property line, and now you're over digging to add on to the back of the house, that excavation has to be shored up so that the neighbor's fence doesn't fall in the hole, type of thing. And we run into this quite often, especially with new construction, where they've torn down a small home and they're putting a larger home in. But we also see it quite a bit with additions and alterations. The addition
Do you
to
have
that,
any
I'm sorry.
requirements? Do you have any requirements for neighbor notification?
So the neighbor notification is on anything requiring or, well, this is our cheat code, but anything requiring a roof, like a screened-in porch or an addition or a gazebo, anything like that that has a solid roof on it requires a sign placement. So that sign, 5 feet off of the public walkway, tells them there's going to be construction here. You have 30 days to appeal it, even though they can't stop the construction.
Yeah.
But it
I was
basically
thinking,
puts
are
them
you
on notice.
aware, are you aware of the district's neighbor notification policy? And it has more to do with structural work and underpinning and common walls and actually touching a neighbor's property as you're doing your work. So like that overdig example, you would be potentially in their property on the other side of their property line.
Right.
And, here we've got more room between our buildings, so I don't think it comes up very often.
Yeah, we really haven't been impacted by that. Usually what happens with us is the overdig is, a foot or two from the property line, and then we get heavy rains and that collapses.
Yeah.
Now the neighbor wants their yard put
Mhm.
back to the original condition. Um, and we do run into it occasionally with party walls or core walls in a townhouse type scenario where a remodeler or a contractor will go in and they somehow damage the party wall. Well, now that party wall has to be brought back to its original condition, and that can be problematic because it requires engineering and it requires a repair method and that type of thing.
Have ever had anyone do an addition to a townhouse or a bump up the way they're doing downtown?
No, usually if they do, we might see a sunroom on a deck type of scenario. Um, Usually the deck is built first and then the sunroom goes on.
Yeah.
But
But I think we're probably governed by zoning a little bit harsher here.
yeah, usually there's public utility right of ways and stuff that run through those backyards, so they're very limited in what can happen in a townhouse.
Yeah.
And then we have adopted all of the appendixes, but they added 3 new appendixes. There is a new appendix for radon testing. More to come on that. We're still trying to figure out who's going to handle that. Um, Monolithic adobe or cob construction. And then we've actually got an application in right now, I believe, for a 3D printed building. So now there's, codes starting to come out on that, inspection schedules and that kind of thing. I don't know. They say they're using that quite a bit in the Midwest or out in the Southwest, but it'll be interesting to see if it takes off here.
Yeah.
Um, any questions for me?
I think you've done a good job. Debbie will make sure that we pass this information on, and we have a library of recordings from the sessions that we've done with all the county officials. And this is a topic that people are used to hearing from us, what the code updates are going to be. You didn't talk at all about energy, and
And I didn't for a purpose, for a
because that's a
reason.
whole subject in itself.
It is.
Yes.
And with the remodeling organization, we find that 90% or more of your contractors, they go prescriptive method. That may change based on what the prescriptive method has become. But we have made changes to the energy portion of the code in order, and we have adopted the Maryland alternative. So there's let's see,
Yeah.
five.
Don't worry, we're going to schedule a separate call for this subject.
Yeah, it's a full hour in itself.
Oh. Yeah. Jason, did you have a question? I see you unmuted yourself.
No, just
Want to say
presenting
hi?
myself to presenting. Yep. Nothing about wall bracing either.
Nothing's really changed.
That's good.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I will say that our inspectors, we've instructed them to pay more attention to the zip wall. We're seeing more and more of it, and we're finding that um, the installers are not rolling the tape. So under the right climate conditions, that tape just peels off. So we're not.
You glued them into the zip R sheathing that has the insulation, because they ought to be checking to make sure you're using longer nails.
Right. We haven't
Which,
seen too much
which
of
we
that.
are, which we are, but
Yeah, we haven't seen too much of that because of I think because of the cost. We have a couple production builders building new homes that use strictly zip wall, and but they are not right now. They are not using the insulated board.
yeah. You see it on our jobs then.
Is it how much more expensive is it than a regular zip panel than a uninsulated?
By the time you factor in house wrap and 2 layers instead of one, I think it's less expensive. A sheet is $65,
Okay.
maybe 70 now. But you do it all in one step,
Right.
except
and
for
I guess-
having to come back and roll the tape.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I guess with that, you're not, you can actually reduce, if you wanted to, you could reduce your overall insulation in the wall. Because that's,
Yes, code allows you to do that. It gives you, and my understanding of the 21 code changes are there's going to be all kinds of factors like this. So you really are going to move away from prescriptive satisfaction of the codes to take advantage of the incentives that you have for high efficiency windows or doors or heating equipment. So yes, it definitely is a whole subject in itself.
I made a note to schedule that, so we'll do that.
Yep.
All right, anything else?
And I would think that would apply to Fairfax too. We could almost do a joint energy code update with both jurisdictions.
Okay.
Not sure where DC is on all that.
Okay.
and I will
Jason,
say
for attending.
the last little thing here, MBOA and the state has started looking at the 2024 codes already. So here very shortly, we're going to start looking at those as well.
Right.
My shelf isn't big enough. Got too many books.
I'm gonna end the recording.
Yep. Thank you very much for taking the time and